What is reality? Well, if you've come here to find the answer, unfortunately I can't help you, but what I can help you do is understand how other people understand reality. And I can also do it in a way that will help you understand your own assumptions and to make sense of how you see the world compared to other people. So if that sounds interesting and you're ready to experience the real world, then let's go. To make this epistemology video not boring, we're going to do things a little different. We'll start off with a questionnaire that I put together outlining 9 different philosophies, and you're going to pick 2 that you agree with and 2 you disagree with. Next, I'm going to use my grade 2 drawing skills to show you a very simple visualization that will help you put all these different philosophies together in a very simple framework. After, I'm going to put all the different philosophies up on this map I call the Epistemology Map, and we'll show you where your views compare to other people. After, I'll talk about the different lines and how they relate to science. And finally, my shtick is using psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science for technology. So I'm going to talk about these different views from that perspective. What we're going to do next is go through a questionnaire with 9 statements. Each statement represents a different philosophy of reality, otherwise known as an epistemology. Only pick 2 that you agree with and pick 2 that you really disagree with. You can always change your mind after when I go through the actual details. Here are the 9 statements. Number 1, nothing exists outside my perceptions. Number 2, I could be a brain on an electrode interacting with a simulated world. Number 3, consciousness makes projections that cause the external world to exist. Number 4, reality is constructed through social interactions. Number 5, consciousness is a mathematically reliable interface to objective reality that is radically different from our subjective experience. Number 6, I can only imperfectly understand objective reality. Number 7, there's a historical reality shaped by social, political, cultural, and economic forces. Number 8, by combining data from physics and human perception, we can understand reality. And number 9, I can fully understand objective reality. Here we have Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein is thinking, I wonder what's going on in reality. I'll represent objective reality with a triangle, with a circle, and a square. Being the philosopher he is, Wittgenstein wants to make sense of the objective world, so he interacts with it, and he gets back a sensory experience. Through his sensory system, he has a conscious experience that's a representation of reality, which we can express as a small triangle, circle, and square. While our subjective experiences are good for our own direct knowledge, they don't really help us communicate with other people. So another option that Wittgenstein has is to create a model, which I'm representing here. And as you can see, we have a circle, square, triangle all smooshed up together. And I'm using that to represent a scientific model or a framework or a theory about how reality works. Let me start again, but this time I'm going to describe the exact same concepts with the standard terms you would use in a philosophy class. If you ever asked yourself, how do I know the things that I know? Well, you would be asking yourself an epistemology question. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that deals with the theories of knowledge, or what we can know and what we cannot know. Next, when we talk about the external world, we'll often talk about an ontology, which is what philosophers use when they're describing reality. And you'll sometimes hear about ontologies in terms of taxonomies or hierarchies of words and concepts that are interrelated. Well, the philosophers have many different ideas about how we get access to the world and how we can even know what we can know. Researchers tend to break this down into a simpler formula where they'll have a research methodology. And the research methodology might use fixed or flexible research methods, which will often come down to some combination of qualitative and quantitative research. Many people have this crazy debate about what's better, qualitative or quantitative. They're both valid methods. There's a problem between empirical and non-empirical research, but qualitative and quantitative are both grounded in evidence. And so that makes them both valid methods that we can use to interpret reality and make sense of it in a research context. May I introduce you to Epistemology Map 1.0. The whole point of Epistemology Map is to be able to look at different philosophies and to compare our views, what we agree with, what we disagree with other philosophies out there, so we can get a better sense of how people think about the world. Let's just look at the empty map for starters. There's two dimensions. Starting at the top, we have the objective external world focus that goes all the way down to the subjective internal consciousness focus. Next, on the horizontal axis, we have those that talk about reality in terms of something that we have no ability to understand, to those that say, yes, we can have a direct experience and fully understand reality. Now I'm going to describe each of the philosophies to you. To make it a little bit more interesting, I'm not going to follow it number 1 to 9, but instead I'm going to follow through in the order you might go through if you're in a research methods class. Starting with number 9, we've got positivism. With the statement, I can fully understand objective reality. Typically, positivism is what you would maybe call a very strong assumption about reality, that all humans can directly understand the world, and what we experience subjectively is more or less a reflection of what's actually out there. This is an older view, and it's not as popular in the scientific community, although some people still do follow this. Number 6, post-positivism. This has the statement, I can only imperfectly understand objective reality. This is a lot more popular in the sciences, and it's based on the belief that we can understand reality to some degree, but it's not perfect. And there's no shortage of examples from neuroscience, such as, our linear perception of sound when we know that the physics is logarithmic. So there are a ton of examples of where our measurement instruments do not match our conscious experience. And we know that there's a lot of distortion and things that exist in consciousness that really have nothing to do with the physical world. And so post-positivists take this more balanced perspective. Number 7, critical theory. This has the statement, there is a historical reality shaped by social, political, cultural, and economic forces. Critical theory is more often going to be used in, say, academic settings when they're doing political lobbying and social change work, where the idea is to change people's perspectives and views and values regarding social issues quite often. I worked in the United Nations for many years and with large-scale global social change organizations. And what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of policy is actually driven by research, policy analysis that personally I would classify as critical theory. You will often find that there's a bit of a conflict. So people who are on other parts of the map can be in major conflict with those who are in the critical theory realm, whereas those in the critical theory realm will also be in conflict with them. It talks about a social reality that's constructed, but it's very strong. So they truly believe that their views are realistic. Let's look at number 4, constructivism. This has a statement, reality is constructed through social interactions. So that might sound a lot like critical theory, but how it's different is it's generally a lot more relaxed and more relative. What that means is that humans can have their concept of what's real through the social interactions and creating things we call social constructs that are not necessarily things that exist in the world, but that we feel. So for instance, the feeling of injustice is an emotion. And so you can look at it relatively and say, well, okay, maybe there's no such thing as injustice in the world of physics, but since people experience it, I can describe people's experiences, and in some sense I'm doing objective research by objectively describing how people feel. I find that in general, the philosophy there is a bit more relative. Like you're describing how humans think, but you acknowledge that it's not necessarily real, whereas those who are in critical theory really talk about social constructs like they're real, literal things. Number one, a classic here, solipsism. So this has a statement, nothing exists outside my perceptions. So solipsism it's an old philosophy. It's something you read about in the ancient Greek writings. And the idea of the solipsist is that you're trapped in your mind. So this is where we'll have our Cartesian situation where if you deny everything that exists around you, you deny your thoughts and you deny your perceptions and your experiences and your feelings and things. And the only thing left that you can't deny is that you're the thinking agent in the process of denying yourself. Well, then you find yourself trapped within your consciousness, or you're just a conscious thinking entity and you don't know anything beyond it. Let's look at number two. Now that's one that I invented and I put a little star. So I called it manipulated solipsism, and it has the statement, I could be a brain on an electrode interacting with a simulated world. So a lot of people will talk about philosophies like this. We've got a ton of great sci-fi movies, and there are now situations where we're building electrodes with human neurons. So actually, this is no longer sci-fi. This is real, and you could very well be one of those brainoids on the chip. So it's manipulated, and it's a little closer to reality because you're not going to be a brain on a chip being fed a simulated world unless there's something a little bit more real outside of you feeding that. So you have to assume that there's an external world if you're part of some conspiracy where people are manipulating you. Now let's look at number three, conscious realism. And it has the statement, consciousness makes projections that cause the external world to exist. You might have found that very confusing, and it certainly is. So that's a concept from Donald Hoffman, and I wasn't even fully sure if it fit here because it's an epistemology that's very original. It's not like your typical epistemologies. I don't know if this is one that I fully buy, but I love the ambition and I love the reason for why it exists. So the idea of conscious realism is that we've been trying to figure out this whole mind-body split for some time, and it's one of the big debates in sciences, right? How do we explain consciousness as something that comes from physical matter? Well, we can't actually. No one has ever achieved that. So we have no viable theory. We have no way to fully manipulate a brain to have the level of control that would allow us to say with any level of confidence that we can truly make that link between consciousness and physical matter. Obviously, there's a lot you can do to a brain that will change the conscious experience, but we don't really understand how it works or what's going on. So the idea of conscious realism was to sort of see if there was an alternative explanation, and that the physical matter was being caused by consciousness. Now, this is definitely controversial in the sciences. It is not widely accepted at all. I've tested this on a few friends, and I think this resonates more with people who have a more spiritual perspective on the world. I don't know if Donald Hoffman nailed it with this, but I like the fact that he was looking for alternative answers. But he did come up with something else that was interesting. Let's look at number five. Five is called Multimodal User Interface Theory, and it states that consciousness is a mathematically reliable interface to objective reality that is radically different from our subjective experience. You can think of this as a step down from conscious realism. So if you found conscious realism a little too intense or too metaphysical, this is maybe an interesting one. And what it says is that we can look at our human conscious experience and say that we have a subjective experience that has a strong correlation to reality, but it's radically different. So what we experience is not necessarily anything like reality. And I think in some ways that can be fair. Rather than take this philosophy as an all or nothing, I sort of see it a little bit more a la carte. I think some of our perceptions are probably much more mathematically similar to how reality is, while others are probably radically different. So, for instance, our conscious experience of color has probably nothing to do with what color is like out there in the real world, whereas I suspect that physical properties are probably closer. Some will argue for and against that, and it gets into some, metaphysical debates about the nature of reality. But I think it's an interesting one also for the future of neurotechnology. Let's now look at number 8, and this is one that I added in because it was a gap on the map. So I called it Triangulated Realism, and what this is that it says that by combining data from the physical world and our human perceptions, we can understand reality. So this would be a radical version of multimodal user interface theory. The idea is that we can make a negotiation between what we experience and our tools of measuring the world, and we can directly know it. Let's look at this from a slightly different perspective when we compare views. Now what I'll do is I'll talk about clusters of epistemologies. Down the middle, we have flexible epistemologies. These are epistemologies that, in my perspective, tend to reflect how most researchers or scientists think about reality. At the top, we have post-positivism, which is much more relaxed. We might understand reality, we might not understand it. It's a bit more of a balanced perspective. At the bottom, we have constructivism, where there's a general belief that we humans design our concepts, we build our social constructs, we create our understanding, and with that, our reality. But it's not absolute truth. So it's a bit more mixed. And in the middle, multimodal user interface theory, it's not widely known. It doesn't reflect what a lot of people think in terms of its very specific attempt at explaining how the world works. However, I don't think it's so far off from the balanced, moderate perspectives that researchers tend to take. So I don't really consider it controversial at all. Now, in the next column, we have certain absolutism. These are epistemologies that come with a really strong statement. At the top, in positivism, we are certain that there's an external world and we can know it. Or at the bottom with critical theory, there's a very strong confidence that if this is a historical event and people feel it's real, it's real. Obviously, there are many people who use critical theory who would not interpret it in such a strong way. And triangulated realism, that epistemology that I added, it fits somewhere in between. It's focused on the external world and the internal world, but making strong statements saying, yes, we can know it. In the column uncertain relativism, we have conscious realism at the top, manipulated solipsism, and solipsism at the bottom. So all of these are fairly uncertain philosophies. They take the approach that you're trapped in consciousness or you're this conscious agent detached from the external world to some degree. So how confident can you be about reality when you can't really directly interact with it? I'm going to describe the rows that go down. And we can think about these different epistemologies from a duality, so a mind-body or a matter-consciousness perspective. If we go right down the middle, we have the dualist epistemology. So these are all epistemologies that make some level of statement that there's a physical world out there, there's a conscious experience out there, and they're probably tied up somehow. There's probably some link. If we look at manipulated solipsism, where you're a brain on an electrode being fed a simulated world, you've got some level of consciousness and some external system that can cause it. We are now building technologies where we're using human neurons and neurons from different animals and hooking them up to electrodes and interacting with them and having a two-way channel between a human or animal nervous system and an electronic nervous system is entirely possible. We're doing it, and it's only going to get more advanced. And it's right here where we can have epistemologies that just zero in exactly on that specific problem. Now, as we go to multimodal user interface theory, we can borrow from the perspectives of dualism that go on the assumption that the external world could be radically different, so different, it's beyond comprehension. And any conscious agent can have a direct interface or interaction with that system through some sort of adaptive system. And multimodal user interface theory, I think, gives us probably one of the best dualist philosophies for this interesting area of research. And finally, triangulated realism for those who want to be very strong on their opinions. And that's basically the idea that we can approach dualism with extreme confidence. Hopefully you can now see that epistemology is not just an abstract philosophical discussion, but rather it gets into some of the core issues that underpin the sciences. How we approach research, how we build technologies that we interact with. And as we start interacting more with artificial intelligence, we'll just be adding digital neurons to our organic neurons, and our nervous systems and our digital nervous systems will probably start to look a lot more seamless. And I believe that multimodal user interface theory is just one of those types of approaches to the world that can usher in that next generation of research that's going to be helping us to understand that critical juncture. Let me know what you thought about the epistemology map. I'd be grateful for a thumbs up if you found this video helpful. If you're interested in psychology and neuroscience for technology, then hit subscribe to get notified of my next videos. And finally, if I'm a brain on an electrode, and you're also a brain on an electrode, and I guess I'll see you in the Matrix.